Sometimes the smallest, most ordinary-looking objects can tell the most extraordinary stories. All across the United States, archaeologists have been finding these little things, dozens of tiny, smooth, worn pieces of ceramic, stone, and glass. For years, everybody thought they knew what they were, game pieces from a secret African tradition. But what if the real story was even stranger, and hiding in a place nobody ever thought to look? Let's dive into this amazing archaeological mystery. Okay, so first, let's just look at the evidence. These objects right here, they were found at two sites in Loudoun County, Virginia, places that were home to enslaved African Americans back in the late 1700s and early 1800s. They're tiny, most are only about half an inch across, and they all have this really distinct, smooth, rounded look. But here's what's weird. These sites are on top of ridges, nowhere near a stream or river. So this isn't from water erosion. Something else had to have polished them down like this.
And that, right there, is the central question. What in the world are they? Are we looking at carefully saved pieces for a game? A real tangible link to a heritage that was almost lost? Or is there a completely different explanation, one that's been hiding in plain sight this whole time? For a long, long time, the most popular and honestly the most compelling idea was the Mancala game theory. And this theory connects these humble little artifacts directly to a powerful African cultural tradition. So what is Mancala? Well, it's not just one game. It's actually a whole family of what are called count and capture games. And its roots in Africa go back thousands of years. The idea is pretty simple but really strategic. You've got two players moving pieces, like seeds or stones, across a board with pits in it, and you're trying to capture your opponent's pieces. And you can totally picture how this might have worked, right? Imagine a game board just dug right into the dirt. And the players are scooping and dropping these little ceramic pieces from one hole to the next. All that constant handling, the scooping, the dropping, over time, it could absolutely polish them into the smooth little objects that we're finding today. And here is the real heart of that theory. The idea that enslaved people carried this tradition with them across the Atlantic. I mean, think about it. In the horrifying conditions of slavery in America, where so many cultural practices were brutally suppressed, playing a game like Mancala would have been an incredible act of resistance. It's a game played in secret, away from the eyes of slave owners, just to keep a piece of home, a piece of their identity alive. But as powerful as that story is, some archaeologists started to have doubts. They came up with a totally different theory, one that shifts our focus from games and recreation to something way more basic: food. This is where the story takes a really fascinating turn. The alternative theory says these objects weren't polished by human hands at all. No, they were shaped by the powerful, grinding muscles inside the digestive system of birds, like chickens and turkeys. Now, to get this, just look at the grit that was taken from a modern chicken's gizzard. The theory is that the artifacts we've been looking at are actually gizzard stones. The idea is that birds would just peck up and swallow little sharp fragments of broken pottery or glass that they found lying around in the yard. See, birds, like chickens, don't have teeth, so they swallow small, hard things to act like grinders. These objects go into a supramuscular organ called the gizzard, which then squeezes and crushes tough food like seeds. Over weeks or even months, that constant grinding action would tumble these sharp little fragments over and over until they became perfectly smooth and polished, just like the artifacts found at the sites. Okay, so now we have two very different but totally plausible explanations. On one side, you've got a story of cultural preservation. On the other, a story about biology and, well, chickens. So let's actually put them side by side and see how the evidence stacks up. So the Mancala theory, it really relies on the idea of these pieces being polished by hand, through play, as this secret act of keeping a culture alive. The gizzard stone theory argues that the polish just comes from a natural biological process, and the stones are simply what's left over from raising poultry for food. And, importantly, it also explains why they might show up in places that aren't exclusively African American. And when you really start to dig into the evidence, the Mancala theory starts to show some pretty big cracks. First, there's almost no historical record, no diaries, no documents, of the game being played in the US during this period. And the artifacts themselves are almost always found scattered around, not found together in a nice little set like you'd expect game pieces to be. Plus, a typical Mancala game uses pieces that are all the same, but these finds are a random mix of ceramic, glass, and stone. And get this, it isn't just a local thing happening in Virginia. This map shows that these objects are turning up at archaeological sites everywhere, from Louisiana and Tennessee all the way up to Illinois. This is a widespread pattern, which means we need an explanation that works in all of these different places. And now check out this comparison. On the left, you've got the artifacts from Virginia, and on the right, those are from New Philadelphia, Illinois, a frontier town that was actually founded by a free African-American man, but was home to both black and white families. The objects are from sites hundreds of miles apart, but they look almost identical. It's uncanny. And this, right here, might be the biggest problem for the Mancala theory. These artifacts haven't just been found in slave quarters. They've also been recovered from areas that were used by white overseers and even at plantation mansions, like the Hermitage. So if this was an exclusively African tradition, what are these pieces doing there? But hang on, because the story might not be a simple either-or. There's actually a third possibility, one that suggests these stones could be both totally mundane and incredibly meaningful at the exact same time. Archaeologist Lori Wilkie offers this really nuanced idea. She agrees they're most likely gizzard stones, but she argues that their strange, smooth appearance, objects that look like they were shaped by nature into something unnatural, could have given them a special spiritual significance. Just imagine you're butchering a chicken and you find one of these inside. It would seem kind of magical, right?
And this idea connects directly to specific spiritual traditions from West and Central Africa, like the Bakongo practice of creating something called minkisi, which were sacred medicines or charms. These were often bundles containing powerful objects. And the practice of collecting unusual things, like smooth stones or weirdly shaped roots or crystals for their spiritual power, that was a tradition that absolutely survived the Middle Passage.
And we know for a fact these spiritual practices were happening. Look at this. This is a confirmed cache of spiritual items. It's got quartz crystals and a projectile point, and it was found deliberately hidden near a chimney at an African-American farmstead. But here's the key difference. Our mystery objects have never been found in a deliberate hidden bundle like this. They're almost always scattered, exactly like you'd expect if they came from chickens just roaming around a yard.
So, after all that, where does this leave us? After looking at all the evidence from all these different sites, what is the real story these tiny little objects are trying to tell us?
The consensus among most archaeologists now is leaning very heavily toward the gizzard stone theory. But it's a huge mistake to see this as just debunking a romantic story about a hidden game. It's not that at all. In fact, it opens the door to a story that is arguably just as powerful, because it's about the harsh realities of daily life, about survival, and about incredible resilience. Because ultimately, these stones tell a profound story about food. Enslaved people were often given the bare minimum rations, and being allowed to raise their own poultry was a critical way to get much-needed protein from meat and eggs. It was also a source of economic power. They could sell extra chickens or eggs to get a tiny bit of independence. And this practice directly continued West African traditions where people raised fowl right next to their homes. These little stones, they're the archaeological footprint of an incredible story of self-sufficiency and of building a life under the most impossible circumstances. In the end, this whole archaeological puzzle is a great reminder that history is a process of constant questioning, where a simple game piece might actually be a gizzard stone, and a gizzard stone might tell a profound story of survival. And it leaves us with one final thought. What else is out there, hiding in plain sight, that we're completely misunderstanding?